I am very excited. Do I always start my videos off saying I'm excited? That's a little ridiculous. I am eagerly anticipating sharing my 2023 TBR with y'all. That sounds so much more boring, doesn't it? Anyway, I am thrilled. I'm ecstatic. I am over the moon to be sharing with you my 2023 TBR. Now, a lot of these books include books that I bought last year or were on my TBR last year that I didn't get to, and I'm kind of like setting in stone that I really want to read these. And I would love to be able to do like a little mid-year check-in, see if I'm actually accomplishing my 2023 TBR, but fingers crossed. I've been really in the reading mood, and a lot of my books that I have on my TBR I've been excited to eventually get to, and I'm feeling it. I'm feeling the TBR completion this year. Mark my words. Starting with one that the first book's been on my TBR since 2019, Chain of Gold, Chain of Iron, and Chain of Thorns. Now, Chain of Thorns is not yet out by the time this video is released, but I'm just now starting reading Chain of Gold, and yeah, I just need to actually like finish and complete this series. So this follows, I think, primarily Cordelia and her adventures. I don't really like knowing the plot of Cassandra Clare books because typically I enjoy the plot not knowing anything because then I am just surprised at every twist and turn. But I know a lot of booktubers have discussed this book, and it's a Shadowhunter series, so it has Shadowhunters and badass characters. A lot of the characters, I believe, are, not that I believe, I know, are sons and daughters of previous characters we already know. And since starting the book, I'm only like 80-ish pages in, but there is so many characters to try to keep track of, and I think that's going to be the trickiest thing when it comes to this book series. But I think after the first book, I should be well acquainted with the characters and be all good and snazzy with that. I do have a kind of 4/5 star prediction for most of these. I haven't typically rated any Cassandra Clare books lower than a 4-star. Maybe in the Mortal Instruments I gave a few 3 stars, but that's the Mortal Instruments, you know, we don't talk about that. I'm kind of going to be bouncing around in terms of like genre and authors and like types of series and stuff. Just trying to keep things mixed up constantly, because why would I organize this video in the slightest? Next, I want to read A Priory on the Orange Tree, Priory of an Orange Tree, and A Day of Fallen Night by Samantha Shannon. Now, these are some chunky bricks, and again, the second book isn't actually out, but once it is out, I do plan on hopefully picking it up. No, definitely picking it up. We've got to remain very optimistic and on top of our TBR this year. Now, this has been a high fantasy book that's been really talked about. I was mostly excited about it because it was a standalone fantasy, but now that's a second book, so it's a duology. But I'm assuming since it was originally marketed as a standalone that the story arcs wrap up in the second book. Maybe it's like a new plot or something, I'm not sure. Nor do I really know what this book is about. Again, because I like not knowing much about my books before going into them. So I know there's dragons, and I read the first chapter in my try a chapter video, and I really enjoyed it, and I figured that I'm going to continue to enjoy it if I continued the book. Next, I want to actually complete a series, and that is the Aragon series by Christopher Paolini. Now, I read the first book, Aragon, back in I think May of 2022, and I had plans to finish the rest of the series in 2022, but alas, that did not happen, and so I want to complete it. It follows our main character Aragon and his dragon Saphira, and they're kind of traveling around and trying to do something. I was going to talk as if I remember the plot, but I have read a lot of books in between reading that book, but there was something that was happening. They're trying to keep the dragons a secret. I think they're trying to like save the dragons because I think they were kind of going extinct, from what I recall. I think it's a children's series. I don't think it's YA. I'm actually pretty certain it's a children's middle grade series. And it's a classic in terms of like middle grades go. And so it's kind of a crime that I have not picked it up, considering that I do love dragons so much. And yeah, it was just a series that I want to complete. So I thought I'd go ahead and stick it on my TBR as well. Then I have The Hobbit by J.R.R. Tolkien. Now, I think this is the biggest crime that I haven't read The Hobbit or The Lord of the Rings. And The Lord of the Rings is kind of on my TBR, but I wanted to start with The Hobbit because I've heard that one's a little bit easier to digest. And I think it would be a good introduction to J.R.R. Tolkien's writing. And yes, I have seen all the movies, but the fact that I have not read the books, is an absolute crime. Next I want to read Mistborn and the Stormlight Archives by Brandon Sanderson. I have not read any Brandon Sanderson books, and I'll stop making the joke that a lot of these books or authors I haven't read from is like criminal, because I would have to be making it about like every single book on my TBR at this point. But I really want to read this series because my best friend Katie is like a huge fan of the Stormlight Archives, and I've heard really good things about Mistborn as well. And Mistborn is a completed series while the Stormlight Archives is still being written. There's like 4 out of 10 books published right now, I think. And so I think that it would be kind of smart to read the Mistborn trilogy first, depending if that's like allowed or not. I don't know if these worlds are interconnected. Again, I don't know anything about this book, but I really want to read it, mostly because of Katie, and I will see if I get to reading it. They are kind of big books, they're chunky, they are thick, and I wish I knew even a vague plot summary, but again, I should just not make TBR videos if I'm not going to give a summary, but I don't like going into books knowing like a heavy summary of things that happen. So if you want to hear like more extended thoughts, or maybe not thoughts, but like a summary, you know, Goodreads does exist, as does Google. If like any of these books intrigue you in title, because clearly I'm saying nothing else past that. Next we have Babel, which is a book that I'm actually going to have to read in January because it is my Chaos X Cast book club book pick over on my Patreon. And yeah, I think everyone and their mother knows about this book. It has been kind of blowing up everywhere, and I love R.F. Kuang. I read her Poppy War trilogy, and I really want to read Babel, and that kind of leads me to my next book on my TBR, which is Yellowface by R.F. Kuang. This is coming out in May, and it is like one of my most highly anticipated releases of 2023 because again, I am a sucker for R.F. Kuang. I do really recommend reading the Poppy War if you haven't, and I can't really recommend Babel until I read it, but it's a book that I know I'm going to love, so I'm excited nevertheless. Then we have Happy Place by Emily Henry. Now, I am also a sucker for Emily Henry books, so I will be buying every new release from her, and Happy Place is one that's coming out I think in June or July. I might be off on those dates, I can't really remember, but again, fun, cute romance books is what Emily Henry is really good at, and yeah, I'm just ready for a fun time, and I'm ready to add to my Emily Henry collection. Then, in order to appease Darcy, hello Darcy, I am going to put Sorcery of Thorns by Margaret Rogerson on my TBR. I know it takes place in a magical library. That is all I know. I really should not be doing these videos, it's fine. But Darcy, if you just scroll back in any video comment, you will be seeing her trying to push me to read Sorcery of Thorns, which I will hopefully eventually do. Stuck it on my TBR just to appease you, I'm gonna be honest, Darcy. Then we have The Last Magician series by Lisa Maxwell. This is one of my like most highly anticipated like series to pick up because I read the very first book in 2020 and I loved it, and then I just didn't continue it. But I just remember being absolutely encapsulated by this world and the characters, and the book covers are stunning, so there is that bias, and I really hope that I love them because like I said, the book covers are stunning, and I hope I don't hate them enough where I have to unhaul them. But regardless, I think I'll keep them because they are so pretty. I think you can see, you can't see them. Can you see them? You can't see them. Anyways, moving on. Then I really want to read, it's called, like the first book's called Well Met. It's by Jen DeLuca, and it takes place where our main character volunteers at a Renaissance festival, and I think there's some sort of like romance that occurs. And I freaking love Renaissance festivals. I go to one in Waxahachie, Texas every single year, and it just brings me so much joy to like dress up and just immerse yourself in that experience. It's so fun. And so I think a romance book, which I love romance books, that take place during a Renaissance festival, I think that crossover is like exactly what I need. I believe it's a trilogy, and so it's definitely a book series that I want to pick up soon because it just seems so fun. Maybe I'll pick it up when I actually go to the Renaissance Festival. Like I'll bring the first book with me and just do a little bit of reading when I'm there. I think that would be so fun, just to be immersed in the Renaissance Festival and then reading a book where it takes place at a Renaissance Festival. It's so good. And if you don't know what a Renaissance Festival is, it's kind of like medieval times slash the Middle Ages, but it's like a whole festival. So there's like stage acts and vendors and shops and performances all kind of themed around the Middle Ages / medieval times, depending on like the time period that things are inspired by, but usually just like, you know, in the old days, but like the old days. Yeah, it's so fun, and if you're a fan of fantasy books or like medieval Middle Ages books, definitely recommend seeing if there's a Renaissance festival near you. Next, I have The Lies of Locke Lamora by Scott Lynch. Now, this was a book that was recommended to me after I finished and loved The Name of the Wind. I think it's on a similar vein, but I think it's almost across similar to Six of Crows as well in terms of like a heist. Again, not really reading the summary, just the vibes, and people recommended based on The Name of the Wind, which I love. So I added that to my TBR. Then I wanted to read another Carrie Maniscalco series, and for that series it's Stalking Jack the Ripper. It doesn't seem like my typical genre, but I think branching out into that sort of genre would be interesting, and so there's only one way to see, and that is to read the books. So I stuck that on. It involves Jack the Ripper and like I think trying to figure out who he is. There's romance. Apparently it's really good romance. I shall be the judge of that eventually. And then the last series on this list is the Avatar: The Last Airbender series. I was gonna say trilogy, but I think it's gonna be more books. I read the first one, which was The Rise of Kyoshi, and I just want to reread the first one and continue the rest of the series. There's 2 more books. I think there's gonna be another one. We will see. There's a new Avatar show in the works that we're getting, and we're getting an Avatar movie, so lots of Avatar things up and coming. So just to be able to return to that universe in the meantime while I wait for those shows to come out, I think would be a very fun time because I absolutely love Avatar. And yeah, reading the book series is so fun. I love being able to see the TV show translated to words. I think that's like such a fun experience because typically it's the other way around where you read a book and you see it translated to the big screen versus like vice versa, obviously. But those are my books. I was gonna say 23 books. I think it's way more than 23 books on my 2023 TBR. Now, will I complete this TBR? Time will only tell. So if you want to follow along to see if I make a complete fool of myself by the end of the year, feel free to do that and subscribe. And a big thank you to my Patreons over on KSXcast for supporting my channel. It literally means the world. And thanks to all of you for sticking around and watching. If you made it this far, leave this little emoji down in the comments. And I really hope to see you in the next one. Toodles!